Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Talk About Sleep, your favorite channel and mine. The book, Let's Talk About Sleep, right here. Get it on Amazon. The link is in the description box, as always. Book number 2 on its way, so keep an eye out for that. As we get closer to 1,000 subscribers, one lucky viewer at random will get a signed copy of that, so got to be in it to win it. Please subscribe if you like what I'm doing here. Please share this with your friends and family. Have them subscribe. And we'll try to get to 1,000 sooner rather than later. Knock on wood. That's me knocking on wood. And as I always say, these videos are for education only. So, we're going to talk today about so we say sleep apnea all the time, right? We talk about sleep apnea a lot, and we see sleep apnea a lot. It's a very bread and butter condition when it comes to sleep specialists. But Bree's Thoughts, that's the name, someone had asked me, Bree's Thoughts had asked me to do a video on non-obstructive sleep apnea. So I thought that was a great idea, instead of answering that in one of my question videos, to actually make a video about it. So what is sleep apnea? What is obstructive sleep apnea and what's non-obstructive sleep apnea? So when we talk about sleep apnea, sleep means it happens in sleep. Apnea means a stoppage of breathing. P-N-E-A, that root word means to breathe. So apnea means to not breathe. Okay? Happens in sleep. So obstructive sleep apnea, what that is, as I always talk about, is the tongue and the soft tissue back here kind of falling backwards and making the airway smaller, right? So let's say this is a normal airway. When you get to this, you're still able to breathe, but everything kind of vibrates. That's where snoring comes from. And then obstructive sleep apnea is when the airway closes off. That person chokes and gasps. Okay, so that's obstructive sleep apnea, which is very simply due to a physical obstruction in the airway. Okay, and it causes the person to kind of wake up throughout the night. Non-obstructive sleep apnea. So that's kind of a loaded term, if you will, because there's a few different kinds. So there's central sleep apnea. Okay, which is basically, that comes from the central nervous system, which is the brain, forgetting to tell the diaphragm, which is down here, to take a breath. The way we normally breathe is our diaphragm expands, or our diaphragm contracts, I should say. Our chest expands, and we basically suck air in from the environment. So it's like the diaphragm contracts, we generate this negative pressure in the chest, we suck air in from the environment because of this negative pressure, and then that's how the process of inhale and exhale occurs. Okay. When somebody has central sleep apnea, what's happening there is the brain is basically not telling the diaphragm to breathe. Okay, so that can happen from opioids, right? We have the opioid epidemic right now in this country. So when people take too much of a medication like that, it basically suppresses the respiratory drive. Okay, so that's when people develop central sleep apnea, or even worse, they die because they stop breathing. Congestive heart failure is another one. Okay, so if somebody has congestive heart failure, the heart is not able to beat basically as strongly. Let's put it that way. So what happens is, without getting too technical, there's parts of the body that recognize when the carbon dioxide level is going higher and the oxygen level is going lower in the blood. And what happens is, so the way we normally breathe is we take in oxygen and we get rid of carbon dioxide, right? When somebody has heart failure, because the heart is not pumping as efficiently as it should, the signal is not getting to the sensors, let's say, as quickly as it should be. So the brain kind of goes from this taking deep breaths to stopping, taking deep breaths and then stopping. Okay, because it's not able to sense the changes to the carbon dioxide as fast as it would be. That's the best way to put it. Okay, so congestive heart failure is a very, very common cause of central sleep apnea. But there's other kinds. So what can happen sometimes, and we see this in our center quite a bit, if somebody has, let's say, a very significant amount of obstructive sleep apnea, okay, again, blockages here, they may develop what we call transitional sleep apnea as well. You can actually get transitional sleep apnea without obstructive sleep apnea. But basically what that is so the brain, when it goes to sleep, it wants to maintain itself in that state, right? It wants to kind of just stay like this, right? When you have a lot of transitions, so sleep state transitions, what that means is you're kind of going from sleep to wake, sleep to wake, sleep to wake, sleep to wake. Where does that happen? If you're uncomfortable, if you're anxious, if you're in pain, right? If you have obstructive sleep apnea, that can do it, right? So what happens is the brain is constantly flipping back and forth between these different stages, either of sleep and wake or deep sleep and light sleep. And in those circumstances, essentially the brain kind of can't keep up, right? So what happens is people will show up on a sleep test as they're having a central sleep apnea event, but it's not really due to, the things we talked about. It's not due to congestive heart failure. It's not due to opioids. It's just because they're transitioning so quickly. We call it transitional sleep apnea. Okay, that happens. You see that every now and then when somebody especially has a bad case of sleep apnea. And then lastly, there's a really interesting part of this where, let's say somebody has, again, obstructive sleep apnea. We put CPAP on them, right, which is pressurized air. And when the pressurized air comes in, it forces the airway open. It should be all problems are taken care of. What happens, though, is that the person may develop central sleep apnea from that. Okay, so we call it treatment emergent central sleep apnea. So after the CPAP is applied, they develop central sleep apnea. So the transitional apnea is what we try to do there is try to get the sleep to be more continuous, right? So I may prescribe a sleeping pill in those cases, or I may say, look, it's going to take some time for your body to adjust to, whatever we're doing. With treatment emergent sleep apnea, same idea. I may have the person try to continue to get used to CPAP, or what we do in those cases sometimes is we switch them over to a special kind of machine called an ASV. That's beyond the topic of this video. But the point is that there's different reasons why somebody may have things outside of the kind of garden variety obstructive sleep apnea, which we've outlined on this video. And fortunately, there's ways to treat them. Okay. One last thing I'll mention kind of in passing is what's called periodic breathing. So that's when people will go to, let's say, from the sea level height we're at now in New York, where I'm filming this, to, let's say, Colorado, right, or Denver. What can happen is because the elevation is so high and there's less oxygen in the air, or less oxygen available to breathe, what can happen is a type of central sleep apnea can occur called periodic breathing. Okay, eventually what happens, the brain and the body does equilibrate to that, but it may take a few days, so that can be uncomfortable as well when somebody's asleep. Again, it's a form of central sleep apnea. So that's the video for today. Kind of a dense topic, but good question, and hopefully you guys got something out of this, that it's not just obstruction and that's it. There's other forms of this. So if you like this video, please click like. If there's any questions on this, Bree's thoughts, you specifically, if there's any questions on this or any of the other videos, just leave them in the comment section down below. Once a month I will answer any and all questions. Until next time, sleep well.